Shalom. My question has to do with how to know the will of God. I understand that this can cover a vast territory, but can you direct me to a passage of the Bible where I can study to have some guidelines? And thank you.
Thank you for this question. This is a recurring question. What is the will of God for my life? And the answer is vast. And for the time we have, we cannot go through all the passages in the Bible which speaks about this great subject. However, I will lead you to one passage of the scriptures that will help us to clarify many things concerning the will of God in our lives. It is in Acts chapter 21, where we have Paul's journey to Jerusalem, his last one before he was arrested and sent to Rome. It is a very intriguing section because throughout Paul's journey to Jerusalem, he was warned many times by the Spirit of God of the suffering he would endure in Jerusalem. And reading the text, it seems that the Spirit told them many times not to go to Jerusalem. However, once Paul landed there, the Spirit of God comforted him and helped him throughout. How do we make sense of Paul's decision despite the warning of God, and this in the context, of course, of the will of God? Let me briefly bring you to a few of these passages. Beginning in Acts chapter 20, verses 22 to 23, when Paul was in Miletus, he said,
And see, now I go bound in the Spirit to Jerusalem, not knowing the things that will happen to me there, except that the Holy Spirit testifies in every city, saying that chains and tribulations await me.
Here, the Spirit clearly warns Paul that great tribulation awaited him in Jerusalem. Then, in the first 6 verses of Acts chapter 21, Paul travels through many different cities. And once in Tyre, the last city, he spends a total of 7 days. And during this time, the believers there also sternly warned him not to go to Jerusalem. To see one verse 4 of chapter 21, it says, And finding disciples, we stayed these 7 days. They told Paul through the Spirit not to go up to Jerusalem. These told Paul through the Spirit, it says, that he should not proceed to go on to Jerusalem. Then, because Paul, being very independent, or should we say stubborn, the Lord sends him a prophet, Agabus, and in a dramatic fashion similar to that of some Old Testament prophets, warns him of the things that will happen to him in Jerusalem. See verse 10 and 11.
And as we stayed many days, a certain prophet named Agabus came down from Judea. When he had come to us, he took Paul's belt, bound his own hands and feet, and said, Thus says the Holy Spirit, so shall the Jews at Jerusalem bind the man who owns this belt and deliver him into the hands of the Gentiles.
Quite graphic, isn't it? And the words and action of Agabus brought the believers to further beg him not to go. They told them, we beg you not to go up to Jerusalem. But Paul did not listen and proceeded anyway. And the question we ask, did he go against God's will? Actually, he did not. He did not. There is one thing we are to realize in the path that Paul decided to take. First, the Spirit did not forbid Paul to go, as he did in a previous occasion, in Acts 16, for instance, verse 7. It says, after they had come to Mysia, they tried to go to Bithynia, but the Spirit did not permit them. This is clear. The Spirit forbade them and they did not go. But in the case of going to Jerusalem, the Holy Spirit simply revealed what would happen to Paul once he got to Jerusalem, but the decision was his to go or not to go. And once in Jerusalem, the Lord blessed him and greatly used him. In fact, once there, Yeshua actually appeared to him, came to him. See what Jesus tells him in Acts 23:11. He says, But the following night the Lord stood by him and said, Go, be of good cheer, Paul. For as you have testified for me in Jerusalem, so you must also bear witness at Rome. So what can we learn from all this? Was it God's will or Paul's will that he goes to Jerusalem? Paul had a choice among many others, but he decided to go there, and the Lord helped him. This event really sheds lights in the way God's will work in our lives. How the will of God works in our life, that is. First, God respects man's free will. So long as we are within the permissible will of God, the decision is actually ours. What is the permissible will of God? It is an allowance for you to exercise your will as long as you keep within the law of God, the law of the Messiah. As long as you are right with God in your life, you can pray for the best path. You can use wisdom, ask mature believers around you. But for the most part, the decision at the end is yours to take. Paul's going to Jerusalem was not against any laws. The problem is that Paul was to suffer, and God strongly warned him, but he agreed to it, and once there, he did a great ministry. So God warned Paul of the consequences, but did not forbid him to go. On the contrary, this warning of what sufferings were ahead in Jerusalem convicted Paul even further to state with such great conviction that he would be bound and die if going to Jerusalem would enhance the glory and the message of the Messiah. And secondly, Paul's good conscience about going to Jerusalem, because he says it, I have a good conscience, confirmed the freedom of choice allowed by the Spirit of God. Good conscience means that he was right with God. And once we are right and in a constant communication with him, the path or the paths in plural become clearer to us. If one lives a life within the law of God, deciphering that what the will of God is should not be a problem. Paul gives this advice in Romans 12:2, and I'm going to close with the question with this. It says, or the answer with this. It says, and do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, so that you may prove what the will of God is, that which is good and acceptable and perfect. Don't be conformed to this world. That is, don't follow the ways of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, which really amounts to constantly growing in the Word and constantly making changes to adjust to God's ways. Then the will of God will become clearer to us.